So tonight's video is all about how China came to be a communist country led by Mao Zedong. After World War II, China fought a civil war, and the two sides in the war were the nationalists and the communists. The nationalists were led by Chiang, and the communists were led by Mao Zedong. Communist forces won the war by 1949 and created the People's Republic of China, led by Mao Zedong. They set up the capital of their government in the city of Beijing. The nationalists, who had lost, and Chiang Kai-shek, fled to the offshore island of Taiwan, where they set up a competing government called the Republic of China, whose capital was at Taipei. When Mao Zedong took over communist China, he had a couple different goals he wanted to achieve. He wanted to make a totalitarian government with absolute control. He wanted to abandon Western and traditional Chinese attitudes. He wanted to make China a modern industrial and agricultural nation. He wanted to distribute land to peasants and improve living conditions in China. And he also wanted to build clinics, schools, roads, railways, canals, and he wanted to do all this by having the government control the economy. The Great Leap Forward was one way that Mao Zedong wanted to achieve his communist goals. The Great Leap Forward was an economic plan launched in 1958. It was aimed at drastically boosting the Chinese economy by increasing the productivity of Chinese workers. And it meant that a lot of Chinese workers had to abandon their other jobs and start working on producing industrial things like steel. All in all, the Great Leap Forward was a massive failure for China. It resulted in food shortages or famines and encountered some peasant resistance. As a result of the Great Leap Forward, over 20 million Chinese died from starvation. After the failure of the Great Leap Forward, Chairman Mao came up with something called the Cultural Revolution. And what this was a 1966 movement led by Mao that called for strict obedience to revolutionary principles, which really meant strict obedience to Mao's teachings. This was Mao's attempt to strengthen his social control in China. And as a result, young people formed groups called the Red Guards, and they went around basically enforcing Mao's wishes and his teachings. Mao's quotes were published in the Little Red Book, which was something that almost every child carried on them. Millions of these books were sold, and young people attacked politicians and teachers for betraying Chairman Mao, for teaching or acting against his revolutionary principles. And people who were accused were often publicly humiliated and sometimes killed. As a result of the massive changes from the Cultural Revolution, China experienced a time of disorder and confusion. Many schools closed, factory production dropped, and violence erupted. Eventually, in 1968, Mao had to use the army to restore order in China, but by that point, thousands had already been killed, and millions of people's lives had been changed or drastically altered as a result of this Cultural Revolution. In terms of foreign relations, as China was undergoing this Cultural Revolution, they mostly avoided contact with the Western world and countries like the US. But by the 1970s, China's desire for advanced technology made them reach out to the US. In 1972, US President Richard Nixon made a historic visit to China, and you can see a picture of them meeting here on this slide. This visit represents the start of better relations between China and the Western world, including the US.